Alright folks, gather round, because today we're talking about a true British icon. No, not a cup of tea or a red telephone box, but something far, far cooler. We're diving into the story of the Hawker Hunter, the jet that didn't just fly, but for a time it owned the sky. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Jaxom Talks channel. So today we're diving into one of the most gorgeous aircraft ever to grace the skies, and no, I'm not being hyperbolic here. We're talking about the Hawker Hunter, a jet fighter that was so pretty, even the French admitted it looked good. Now if you can get a compliment out of the French about a British aircraft, you're doing it right. Now, the Hunter is one of those aircraft that doesn't get nearly enough love in the popular consciousness. Everyone knows about the Spitfire, right? That's basically Britain's spirit animal, and people have heard of the Harrier because, well, vertical takeoff is just showing off. But the Hunter? The Hunter is that middle child who went to university, got a good degree, had a successful career spanning for decades, and nobody talks about it at family gatherings because it wasn't dramatic enough. Well, today we're fixing that. So strap in, because we're about to explore how Britain went from propeller-driven Spitfires to swept-wing jet fighters faster than you can say the empire is crumbling. Let's set the scene. It's the late 1940s. World War II is over. Britain is broke. Rationing is still in full swing, and the RAF is looking at its fighter fleet thinking, well, these Meteors are nice, but they're already a bit outdated, aren't they? The Gloucester Meteor was Britain's first operational jet fighter, and it did sterling work, but it had straight wings, which at the time was a bit like showing up to a race with a horse when everyone else had motorcycles. The Germans had figured out during the war that swept wings were the way forward for high-speed flight, and everyone was copying their homework. The RAF put out a specification in 1945 called F-43-46, which is the kind of thrilling name only a military bureaucrat could love. They wanted a single-seat fighter that could hit high subsonic speeds, had good maneuverability, and could actually be maintained without requiring a PhD in mechanical engineering. This last bit was important because, as we'll see, the British had a habit of building aircraft that were brilliant but needed 3 technicians and a wizard to keep them flying. Enter Hawker Aircraft, a company with a pedigree that included the Hurricane. You know, the fighter that actually shot down more German aircraft in the Battle of Britain than the Spitfire, but gets none of the credit because it wasn't as pretty. Hawker was led by the legendary Sidney Cam, who had designed the Hurricane. He was basically the Michelangelo of fighter aircraft, except instead of painting the Sistine Chapel, he drew planes that could kill you at 600 miles per hour. Cam's team started working on what would become the Hunter, initially called the P1067. Now, the development wasn't exactly smooth. The first prototype, powered by a Rolls-Royce Avon engine, first flew on July 20, 1951. And here's where things get very British. They built a second prototype with a different engine, the Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire, just to hedge their bets. This is the equivalent of building 2 identical houses, but giving them different plumbing systems to see which one works better. Only the British, honestly. The first prototype was fast, really fast for its time, but it had some issues. The original design had problems with gun gas ingestion. Basically, when the pilot fired the guns, the exhaust gases would get sucked into the engine intakes, which would cause the engine to cough, splutter, and occasionally quit entirely. Imagine you are in the middle of a dogfight, you pull the trigger, and your engine just goes, nope, I'm done. Not ideal really. They fixed this by moving the guns lower in the nose and adding baffles, which is engineering speak for we put some metal bits in the way so the bad air can't get where it shouldn't. The problem was solved, and the RAF loved what they saw. The Hunter entered RAF service in 1954 with number 43 Squadron, and pilots absolutely loved it as it was beautiful to fly. The controls were perfectly harmonized, it was stable as a rock, and it had excellent visibility from the cockpit. After years of flying temperamental aircraft that tried to kill you if you looked at them wrong, RAF pilots were suddenly handed a fighter that handled like a sports car. It was also drop-dead gorgeous. Those swept wings, that elegant fuselage, the sleek lines, the Hunter looked fast just sitting on the runway. Historical aviation enthusiasts still like to argue about whether the Hunter or the F-86 Sabre is the prettiest fighter of the era. This is a bit like arguing whether you prefer brunettes or blondes. They're both lovely. Just appreciate it. But here's the thing, the early Hunters, the F1 and F2 variants, had a rather embarrassing problem. They could only carry about 3 minutes and 45 seconds of fuel for combat. That's not a typo. You'd take off, fly around for a bit, maybe see an enemy. You could think about engaging them, but then your fuel light would come on and you'd have to go home. The Hunter had a smaller combat range than some pilots' attention spans. This was because the Avon engine was thirstier than a camel in the Sahara, and the internal fuel capacity was, let's say, optimistic. The RAF worked around this by fitting external fuel tanks, which helped but also ruined those beautiful clean lines everyone loved. Hawker managed to fix this in the F4 and F6 versions. They did this by increasing the internal fuel capacity and fitting better engines. The F6, which appeared in 1956, became the definitive RAF version. It was fitted with the more powerful Avon 203 engine, could carry more fuel, and had underwing hard points for bombs or rockets. Suddenly, the Hunter wasn't just a pretty face. It could now undertake ground attack work too. Now you might be thinking, okay, it's pretty and pilots liked it, but did it actually fight anyone? The Suez Crisis in 1956 was the Hunter's first major combat test. Flying from Cyprus, RAF Hunters flew top cover for French and British forces. They found themselves face to face with Egyptian MiGs, and the Hunter proved it was more than just a pretty face. Its combination of speed, agility, and the devastating cannon armament made it a formidable opponent. It was here that the Hunter really earned its spurs in combat. The RAF Hunters spent most of their time doing what's called peacetime defending, which is a fancy way of saying they flew around British airspace looking menacing and occasionally intercepting Soviet bombers that were just popping by to say hello and test response times. However, the Hunter was exported to over 20 countries, and many of them absolutely did use it in combat. Let's start with the Swiss, who operated Hunters from 1958 to 1994. The Swiss never fought anyone because, well, they're Swiss, but they did accidentally lose over a dozen of their own aircraft during training over the years. This was less a problem with the Hunter as an aircraft, and more a problem with the Swiss Alps being full of mountains that tend to jump out at you when you least expect it. The Swiss loved their Hunters so much they kept them in service for 36 years, which in fighter terms is like keeping the same car from 1958 to 1994. Can you imagine driving a 1958 Chevy Impala in 1994 and still being perfectly happy about it? India was probably the Hunter's most enthusiastic combat user. The Indian Air Force operated Hunters in both the 1965 and 1971 wars against Pakistan. In 1965, Hunters were the IAF's primary ground attack aircraft, and they performed brilliantly, hitting Pakistani airfields, tanks, and infrastructure. One of the most famous stories of the Hunter's prowess comes from the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War. The Indian Air Force used their Hunters to devastating effect, particularly in the Battle of Lanjula. A handful of Hunters, armed with rockets and cannons, single-handedly decimated an entire Pakistani armored column. It was a textbook example of air power saving the day, and it cemented the Hunter's legendary status in India. Indian Hunter pilots claimed several Pakistani aircraft destroyed on the ground, though air-to-air combat results were more mixed because by 1965, the Hunter was already facing more modern opposition. By the 1971 war, the Hunters were getting a bit long in the tooth, but they still did good work, especially in the ground attack role. There's a famous incident where an Indian Hunter pilot, squadron leader Peter Christie, actually shot down a Pakistani F-86 Sabre in a dogfight. This is particularly satisfying because the Sabre was supposed to be the Hunter's superior in combat, but Christie basically said, "Watch this," and proved that the pilot matters more than the plane. The Middle East saw plenty of Hunter action too. Jordan operated Hunters and used them in various conflicts. During the Six-Day War of 1967, Jordanian Hunters flew ground attack missions against Israeli forces, though they suffered heavy losses because the Israeli Air Force was, shall we say, rather good at their job. Perhaps the most extensive combat use came from Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, during the Bush War from the 1960s to 1979. The Rhodesian Air Force operated Hunters primarily in the ground attack role, and they were brutally effective. The Rhodesians modified their Hunters to carry massive loads of bombs and rockets. Pilots would conduct fire force operations, providing close air support to troops on the ground. These aircraft were worked hard, flown low, and maintained under difficult conditions, and they kept flying. Say what you will about the politics of that conflict, but it proved the Hunter was one tough aircraft. The Hunter became one of Britain's most successful export fighters, and there's a good reason for that. It was relatively cheap, easy to maintain, and didn't require the latest in technology to keep them operational. For air forces that couldn't afford or didn't need cutting-edge supersonic fighters, the Hunter was perfect. Over 1,900 Hunters were built, and they served with air forces including Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Singapore, Kenya, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Iraq, Jordan, India, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Chile, Peru, and Switzerland. That's a serious customer list. The Royal Navy even got a version of the Hunter. Actually, the Fleet Air Arm evaluated the Hunter but never adopted it for carrier operations. They did, however, use land-based Hunters for training and various other roles. The two-seat trainer version, the Hunter T7, deserves a special mention. This was developed to train pilots on the Hunter and other high-performance jets, and it became almost as successful as the single-seater. The T-7 had a lengthened nose to accommodate the second seat while still maintaining most of the performance characteristics. Countries bought these trainers in significant numbers, and some are still flying today with private operators. By the 1960s, the Hunter was being replaced in RAF service by newer aircraft like the English Electric Lightning, which was supersonic and could actually intercept Soviet bombers before they reached Britain. The Lightning was faster, more modern, and exponentially more difficult to maintain. Pilots called it the fighter pilot's fighter, which is code for absolutely mental but brilliant fun. The Hunter slowly transitioned to ground attack and training roles only. The RAF kept Hunters in service until 1994 for various specialized roles, including as the mount for aerobatic teams and advanced training. That's a 40-year service life, which is frankly remarkable. But here's the really impressive bit. Some Hunters are still flying today. Private operators, particularly in the UK and South Africa, maintain airworthy Hunters and display them at air shows. There's something magical about seeing a 1950s jet fighter still slicing through the sky, engines howling, looking as elegant as it did 70 years ago. The Hunter also served as the mount for various aerobatic teams. The RAF's famous Black Arrows team flew Hunters and set a world record in 1958 by looping a crazy 22 aircraft in formation. That's not flying. That's synchronized swimming with jet fighters. The team performed at the Farnborough Air Show, and the loop was so impressive that even today, people talk about it with hushed reverence. So what's the final verdict on the Hawker Hunter? In pure performance terms, it was never the absolute best at anything. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the most heavily armed, it couldn't carry the most bombs, and it wasn't even the longest ranged. The Americans had the F-86 Sabre, which many consider its equal or better in a dogfight. The Soviets had the MiG-17, which was a tough opponent. By the late 1950s, supersonic fighters were arriving that made the Hunter look at walking pace. But here's what the Hunter was: reliable, beautiful, pleasant to fly, easy to maintain, effective in multiple roles, and exportable. It was the Toyota Corolla of the 1950s jet fighters. Not flashy, not the fastest, but dependable and long-lasting. Except, the Corolla doesn't have 4x 30mm cannons and can't blow up tanks. The Hunter represented a particular moment in aviation history when jets were becoming mature technology but hadn't yet become the complex, computer-laden monsters they are today. You could still maintain a Hunter with basic tools and mechanical knowledge. You didn't need mission computers or fly-by-wire systems. It was pure flying by the pilot, stick, throttle, rudder and wings. For the countries that operated it, the Hunter provided decades of reliable service. For the pilots who flew it, it provided one of the finest flying experiences of the jet age. And for those of us who love aviation history, it provides a reminder that sometimes the most successful designs aren't the most revolutionary. The Hunter flew with 21 air forces, fought in multiple conflicts across 3 continents, and remained in service for over 4 decades. Not bad for an aircraft that was supposed to be a stopgap until something better came along. And it's still flying today, which is more than you can say for most of its contemporaries. The Sabres are mostly in museums. The MiG-17s are largely retired, but the Hunter is still out there, still beautiful, still making that distinctive Avon engine howl at air shows around the world. So here's to the Hawker Hunter, Britain's understated, elegant and thoroughly successful middle child of the jet age. It may not get the headlines the Spitfire gets, but it deserves every bit as much respect. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what aircraft you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, this is Jaxom Talks, reminding you that sometimes the best things in life are the ones that just work.